The security guard's voice cut across the morning air like a blade. "Sir, you need to leave. This area is restricted to credentialed personnel only." The old man in the faded tan windbreaker did not argue. He did not raise his voice or demand to speak with his supervisor. He simply looked past the guard toward the parade ground where 200 young men and women in immaculate dress uniforms were arranging white, folding chairs in perfect rows. His eyes found her almost immediately. Third row from the front. Dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Her mother's cheekbones. Her grandmother's eyes. What the guard did not know, what no one on that campus knew, was that the building they were standing beside bore this old man's name in bronze letters 3 inches tall. And in exactly 40 minutes, everything they thought they knew about legacy and legend was about to change. The guard stepped closer, his patience thinning in the May heat. "Sir, I need you to acknowledge that you understand. This is a restricted ceremony. VIP guests and credentialed family members only." The old man turned to face him slowly. His movements carried an economy that seemed out of place in someone his age, each gesture precise despite the faint tremor in his hands. "I understand," he said. His voice was soft, hoarse from disuse, but there was something underneath it, something that made the guard hesitate for just a moment before continuing his rehearsed speech about visitor parking and the information center on the other side of campus. If you're watching this story unfold from anywhere in the world, we would love to know where you're joining us from today. Drop a comment below with your city or country. Stories of hidden heroes happen in every community, and you might just have a quiet legend in your own neighborhood. Now, let us continue. The old man nodded politely as the guard spoke, but his attention had already drifted back to the parade ground. To her, Elena Tornemateos, 22 years old, graduating top of her class, being commissioned as a second lieutenant in exactly 43 minutes, selected for the Special Operations Training Program. His program. He had built it from nothing 50 years ago on this very ground. Back then, there was no parade field, no gleaming brick buildings, no bronze statues of warriors in combat gear. There was just an empty stretch of Virginia clay and a dream that most of the Pentagon thought was insanity. Train operators to think as well as they fight, he had argued in briefing rooms full of skeptics. Give them judgment, not just skill. Make them scholars and warriors both. They had laughed at him until his graduates started coming home alive from missions that should have been suicide, until the methods he developed became doctrine across every branch, until the men he trained became generals, and the generals became legends, and the legends built an institution that would outlast them all. The Nathaniel E. Thorne Special Operations Training Center. The name was carved into granite above the main entrance. There was a bronze plaque beside the door listing his accomplishments in language so sanitized it barely resembled the truth. There was even a statue of him as a younger man, frozen forever in combat gear, eyes fixed on some distant horizon. He had not seen any of it until today. The guard was still talking, something about federal property and trespassing charges, but the old man was not listening anymore. He was watching Elena adjust her uniform, watching her laugh at something a fellow cadet said, watching her touch something at her throat. A chain, with something hanging from it that caught the morning light. His compass, the one he had given to her mother 30 years ago. The one Margaret had promised to pass down. She kept it. All these years. His chest tightened. The cancer that was eating him from inside chose that moment to send a spike of pain through his abdomen, and he pressed his hand against his ribs to steady himself. The guard noticed. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need medical assistance?" "I am fine." The old man straightened, and for just a moment something shifted in his bearing. His shoulders squared, his chin lifted, the tremor in his hands stilled. It was subtle, lasting barely a second, but the guard felt it, felt the air change around this frail, elderly man in his worn windbreaker and orthopedic shoes. Then the moment passed, and he was just a confused old civilian again. "I will find the visitor center," the old man said. "Thank you for your help." He turned and walked away from the gate, moving slowly along the perimeter fence. The guard watched him go, something nagging at the back of his mind. Something about the way the old man had stood when he straightened. something that reminded him of his drill instructors, of his senior NCOs who had shaped him into a soldier. But the thought passed as quickly as it came, lost in the chaos of ceremony preparations and VIP arrivals. The old man did not go to the visitor center. Instead, he followed the fence line until he found a service entrance, a gap where delivery vehicles entered, and where security was focused on checking credentials rather than watching for elderly men who moved with purpose through the shadows. He slipped through during a shift change, and within minutes he was standing at the base of the bronze statue. His own face stared back at him, cast in metal 40 years younger. Strong jaw, clear eyes, the face of a man who believed he could change the world through sheer force of will. He barely recognized himself. The real Nathaniel Thorne reached out and touched the statue's boot with trembling fingers. The metal was warm from the sun. Solid. Belmano. Everything he no longer was. From his leather satchel, he withdrew a photograph, edges worn soft from years of handling. A little girl with dark hair and her grandmother's eyes, laughing at the camera. She was 3 years old in that picture. It was the last time he had held her. I came back, he whispered to the bronze face above him. I know I should not have. I know Robert wanted me gone, but I had to see her, just once more. A group of cadets rounded the corner of the building, their voices bright with excitement about the ceremony. They barely glanced at the old man, standing before the statue. Why would they? He was nobody, just another elderly visitor confused about where he was supposed to be. One of them, a young man with broad shoulders and an easy smile, nudged his companion and pointed. Look at Grandpa over there. Think he is lost? The others laughed. The old man did not react. He simply tucked the photograph back into his satchel, adjusted his windbreaker, and began walking toward the parade ground. He would find a spot at the edge of the crowd. He would watch her receive her commission. He would see her smile. And then he would leave, and she would never know he had been there at all. That was the plan. But plans, as Nathaniel Thorne had learned across 5 decades of war and loss and sacrifice, rarely survive contact with the enemy. And somewhere on this campus, a security captain named Marcus Vance was already receiving reports about an elderly intruder who had bypassed the main gate. The cadets continued toward the ceremony, still laughing about the confused old man. They walked past the dedication plaque without glancing at it. They had seen it 1,000 times. They knew the name carved there the way they knew the names of buildings and roads and training facilities across the campus. Nathaniel Thorne, the architect, founder of the program, dead for 20 years. Except he was not dead. He was standing 50 meters from the stage where his granddaughter would receive her commission, watching her adjust his compass against her throat, and he was running out of time. The cadet with the broad shoulders stepped directly into the old man's path. His name tag read Park, and his smile carried the easy confidence of someone who had never been proven wrong about anything important. Sir, the visitor center is on the other side of campus. This area is for program personnel only. Nathaniel stopped walking. He looked at the young man's face, at the insignia on his collar marking him as a senior cadet, at the way he stood with his weight forward like he was preparing to physically redirect a confused elderly civilian. Behind Park, 3 other cadets had stopped to watch, their expressions mixing amusement with impatience. Yes, Nathaniel said quietly. I understand. Thank you. He did not explain that he had designed the insignia Park was wearing. He did not mention that he had written the training manual these cadets had memorized, that the tactical doctrines they practiced had been born in his mind during sleepless nights in jungle outposts and desert-forward operating bases. He simply nodded with the quiet dignity of a man who had long ago stopped needing others to recognize his worth. Park's smile flickered, something in the old man's calm unsettling him in a way he could not name. Then he shrugged and gestured toward the main road. Straight down that path, sir. Big building with a flag out front. You cannot miss it. Thank you, Nathaniel said again, and he stepped around the cadets and continued toward the parade ground. Park watched him go, frowning. One of his companions elbowed him. What is wrong with you? Nothing. Park shook his head. Something about that guy. The way he looked at me. Like what? I do not know. Like he was disappointed. The cadets laughed and moved on, and Nathaniel Thorne found a spot at the edge of the parade ground where a row of oak trees provided shade and partial concealment. His legs were trembling from the walk, the cancer-sapping strength he could no longer spare, but he refused to sit. Not yet. Not until the ceremony was over. From this angle, he could see the stage clearly. The podium with the Academy seal. The row of chairs where the commandant and distinguished visitors would sit. The section reserved for graduating cadets where Elena was now taking her seat, her posture perfect, her face bright with anticipation. She had her mother's smile. Margaret's smile. The same smile that had stopped Nathaniel's heart at an embassy reception in Saigon 53 years ago, when he was a young captain with more ambition than sense, and she was a diplomat's daughter who saw through every wall he tried to build. The memory hit him like shrapnel, sudden and sharp. Saigon, 1971. The reception hall glittering with chandeliers and false promises. Margaret in a blue dress that matched her eyes, laughing at something the French ambassador had said. Nathaniel watching her from across the room, knowing he should stay away, knowing that men like him had no business pursuing women like her. She had walked straight up to him anyway. "You're the one they call the architect," she said. "I have heard stories about you." "You should not believe stories," he had replied. She had smiled then, that smile, and said, "I never believe anything until I see it for myself." They were married 3 months later. Robert was born the following year. In a hospital in Germany, while Nathaniel was on a mission he still could not discuss. He had missed the birth by 6 hours. He had promised Margaret it would never happen again. It happened again, and again, and again. Every birthday, every school play, every moment that mattered. He was somewhere else, building something he believed was more important than his own family. And Margaret had waited, patient and loving and alone, until waiting was all she had left. She died 10 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, the same disease now eating through him like a slow fire. He had come to the funeral, stood in the back row where Robert could not see him, watched his son weep over a casket that held the only woman Nathaniel had ever loved. Robert had seen him anyway, had looked up at exactly the wrong moment, and found his father's eyes across the cemetery. The expression on his son's face had not been anger or grief or even hatred. It had been exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of a child who had spent 40 years hoping his father would change and had finally, completely given up. Robert had turned away without speaking, and Nathaniel had honored that silence for 10 years, watching his granddaughter grow from a distance, never reaching out, never interfering. Until now, a woman's voice cut through his memories. "Sir, are you all right?" Nathaniel blinked, returning to the present. A sergeant in dress uniform was standing before him, her expression concerned. Her name tag read Okonkwo, and she carried a clipboard marking her as part of the ceremony's protocol staff. "You have been standing in the sun for quite a while," she continued. "Can I get you some water? There are seats in the shade if you need a rest." Her voice carried no condescension, no impatience. Just simple human kindness offered without expectation. Nathaniel's throat tightened. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to him with genuine concern. In the care facility where he had spent the last 8 months, the staff were professional but distant. They saw a dying old man, not a person. They managed his decline with clinical efficiency and carefully averted eyes. "Water would be appreciated," he said. "Thank you, Sergeant." Okonkwo smiled and produced a bottle from somewhere, pressing it into his trembling hands. Her eyes lingered on those hands for a moment, on the scars that crossed his knuckles, on the precise way he gripped the bottle despite the tremor. Something flickered in her expression. Curiosity, perhaps, or the beginning of a question she did not know how to ask. "The ceremony should be starting soon," she said. "Are you here for one of the graduates?" "My granddaughter." The words came out before he could stop them, rougher than he intended. "She is being commissioned today." Okonkwo's face softened. "That is wonderful, sir. You must be very proud." Nathaniel looked toward the stage, toward Elena adjusting her cap, toward the compass glinting at her throat. More than she will ever know. Okonkwo followed his gaze, trying to identify which cadet he meant. "If you would like, I can find you a seat closer to the front. Family members are usually in the reserved section, but I'm sure we can make room for a grandfather who came to see his granddaughter's big day." The offer was genuine. Nathaniel could see it in her eyes, in the way she stood ready to advocate for him against whatever bureaucratic obstacles might arise. And for one moment, he considered accepting, considered walking to the front row and sitting where Elena might see him, might look out at the crowd and find an old man's face she would not recognize. No, he shook his head slowly. "Here's fine. I do not want to cause any trouble." Something in his voice made Okonkwo hesitate. "Are you sure, sir? It would not be any trouble at all." "I am sure." She studied him for a long moment, that curious expression deepening. Then she nodded and touched his arm gently. "If you need anything, I will be right over there. Just wave and I will come." She walked away, glancing back once before returning to her duties. Nathaniel watched her go, grateful for her kindness and hoping desperately that it would not draw more attention to his presence. But it was already too late for that. Across the parade ground, a man in an immaculate captain's uniform was speaking into a radio, his eyes fixed on the elderly civilian who had somehow bypassed security and was now standing at the edge of the ceremony area. Captain Marcus Vance had spent 3 years making this academy's security flawless. Today's ceremony included a 4-star general, a United States senator, and enough media coverage to make or break careers. He had planned for protesters, for disgruntled former cadets, for foreign intelligence officers trying to photograph classified attendees. He had not planned for a confused old man in a windbreaker. But confused old men did not bypass security checkpoints. They did not position themselves with clear sight lines to the stage. They did not stand with the unconscious stillness of someone who had spent decades learning to be invisible. Vance began walking toward the tree line, 2 MPs falling in his step behind him. His legs trembled with the effort of standing, but Nathaniel would not sit. Not yet. Not until he saw her face one more time. Not until he knew, with absolute certainty, that his legacy would continue through her, even if she never knew his name. Captain Vance moved through the crowd with the precision of a man who had mapped every inch of this campus in his mind. The 2 MPs behind him matched his pace exactly, their hands resting on their belts, their eyes scanning for threats that existed only in their training scenarios. Until today, the old man had not moved from his position beneath the oak trees. He stood with his weight evenly distributed, his hands loose at his sides, his attention fixed on the stage where the graduating cadets were taking their seats. From a distance, he looked like any other elderly visitor who had wandered into the wrong area. But Vance had not risen to captain by accepting what things looked like. He stopped 3 meters from the old man, close enough to establish authority, but far enough to react if the situation escalated. "Sir, I need to see your credentials." Nathaniel turned slowly. His eyes met Vance's and held them for a moment longer than a confused civilian would. Then he lowered his gaze in the way of a man who had long ago learned that some battles were not worth fighting. "I do not have credentials," he said. "I just came to watch." Vance's jaw tightened. "This is a restricted ceremony. VIP guests only. How did you get onto the campus?" "I walked." "Through which gate?" Nathaniel did not answer. His attention had drifted back to the stage, to Elena laughing at something the cadet beside her had said. The morning light caught the compass at her throat, and something in his expression shifted, softened, broke. Vance stepped closer, inserting himself into the old man's line of sight. "Sir, I asked you a question. Which gate did you enter through?" "I do not remember," Nathaniel said quietly. "Does it matter?" "It matters because you are trespassing on federal property." Vance's voice carried the particular contempt of someone who had found an easy target. "Because today's ceremony includes a 4-star general and a United States senator. Because I have spent 3 months planning security for this event, and you somehow bypassed every checkpoint I put in place. I did not mean to cause trouble. And yet here we are." Vance gestured to the MPs. "This man is going to be escorted to the security office for questioning. If he resists, restrain him." The MPs moved forward, flanking Nathaniel on either side. One of them reached for his arm, and the old man did not pull away. He simply stood there, accepting the indignity with the same quiet composure he had shown the cadets who mocked him. But something in his bearing had changed. His shoulders had squared almost imperceptibly. His chin had lifted by a fraction of an inch. His hands, still loose at his sides, had stopped trembling. Sergeant Okonkwo appeared at the edge of the confrontation, her clipboard pressed against her chest. "Captain Vance," she said carefully, "is there a problem?" Vance did not look at her. "This does not concern you, Sergeant. Sir, this man is here to see his granddaughter graduate. He is not causing any harm. Perhaps we could find him a seat in the family section instead of making a scene right before the ceremony begins." Vance's eyes narrowed. "Are you questioning my judgment, Sergeant?" "No, sir. I am simply suggesting that removing an elderly grandfather in front of 200 cadets and their families might not be the best optics for the academy." For a moment, the captain's certainty flickered. Okonkwo had found the one argument that might reach him, the calculation of appearances and career implications. But then his gaze returned to Nathaniel, to the worn windbreaker and orthopedic shoes and trembling hands, and his contempt solidified into something harder. "This man has no credentials," he said flatly. "No identification. He bypassed security through means he refuses to explain. For all we know, he is a threat to everyone here." Nathaniel almost laughed. Almost. But the sound died in his throat as another wave of pain rolled through his abdomen, the cancer reminding him that time was a luxury he no longer possessed. "I'm not a threat," he said. "I'm just an old man who wanted to see his granddaughter one more time." Vance leaned closer, his voice dropping to a register meant to intimidate. "Every security breach I have ever investigated started with someone who just wanted something innocent. An old girlfriend who just wanted to talk. A former employee who just wanted to collect his things. A father who just wanted to see his kids." The old man's eyes flickered at that last one, and Vance smiled coldly. "You do not have credentials. You do not have identification. You do not belong here. And unless you can give me one good reason to believe otherwise, you're going to spend the rest of this ceremony in a holding cell." Nathaniel was silent for a long moment. On the stage, a technician was testing the microphone, the thump of feedback echoing across the parade ground. The ceremony would begin in minutes. Elena would walk across that stage, receive her commission, become a second lieutenant in the United States Army. She would join the Special Operations Training Program, learn the methods he had developed, carry forward the legacy he had built. And she would do it all without ever knowing he had been here. That was what he wanted, what he had told himself he wanted. To see her and leave, a ghost passing through the life he had abandoned. But standing here with MPs on either side and a captain's contempt burning into him, Nathaniel felt something stir in his chest. Something he had thought the cancer had killed along with everything else. Pride. Not for himself. For her. "She earned her place here," he said softly. "Whatever you think of me, whatever you decide to do, that does not change. She earned it." Vance blinked, thrown by the non sequitur. "What?" "My granddaughter." Nathaniel's voice gained strength, the hoarseness fading. "She graduated top of her class. She was selected for the program on her own merit. I had nothing to do with it. I have had nothing to do with her life for 19 years. But I'm proud of her, and I wanted to see her become what I always knew she could be." Something in the captain's expression shifted. Not sympathy, not understanding, but perhaps a sliver of uncertainty. Then he shook his head, and the moment passed. "That is a touching story, but it does not explain how you got onto this campus, and it does not give you the right to be here." He turned to the MPs. "Take him to holding. We will sort this out after the ceremony." The MPs tightened their grip on Nathaniel's arms. Okonkwo stepped forward, her mouth opening to protest, but Vance silenced her with a look. And then a voice cut across the confrontation, sharp with authority. "Captain Vance." Everyone turned. A man in the uniform of a command sergeant major was striding toward them, his chest heavy with ribbons, his face carved from decades of service. His name Tag Redweb, and his eyes were fixed on the elderly civilian with an intensity that made Vance's hand move instinctively toward his sidearm. "Sergeant Major," Vance said carefully, "I am handling a security matter." Webb did not acknowledge him. He walked past the captain, past the MPs, and stopped directly in front of Nathaniel. His eyes moved across the old man's face, cataloging features, comparing them to a memory that was 3 decades old. His voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. "It cannot be." Nathaniel met his gaze. The corner of his mouth twitched in something that was almost a smile. "Hello, Elijah. It has been a long time." Command Sergeant Major Webb's face went white. His hands began to shake, and Captain Marcus Vance watched in confusion as the most senior enlisted soldier at the academy took one step back and snapped to attention. "Sir," Webb said, his voice cracking, "we thought you were dead." The words hung in the morning air like smoke from a distant explosion. Captain Vance looked from Webb to the old man and back again, his confusion hardening into suspicion. "Sergeant Major, what are you talking about? Who do you think this is?" Webb did not break his attention. His eyes remained locked on Nathaniel's face, searching for confirmation of something he desperately wanted to believe and equally desperately feared. 35 years of military discipline kept his body rigid, but his voice betrayed him. "Sir," he said again, "is it really you?" Nathaniel studied the man before him. The last time he had seen Elijah Webb, the sergeant major had been a young staff sergeant with a disciplinary file 3 inches thick and a chip on his shoulder the size of Texas. Command had wanted to discharge him. Nathaniel had seen something else. "You filled out," he said quietly. "Last time I saw you, you were 160 pounds soaking wet." Webb's composure cracked. A sound escaped his throat that was half laugh and half sob. "Fort Bragg, 1989. You pulled me out of a court-martial and told me I had 2 choices, wash out or wise up. And which did you choose?" Webb's chin trembled. "I'm standing here, sir, 35 years later. Because of you." Vance stepped forward, his patience exhausted. "Someone needs to explain what is happening. Right now." Webb turned to face him, and the transformation was immediate. The emotional man who had been fighting tears vanished, replaced by a command sergeant major with 3 decades of combat experience and 0 tolerance for incompetence. "Captain," he said, his voice cold enough to freeze the May sunshine, "do you know whose building you work in?" Vance blinked. "The Thorne Center. Named after the program founder." "Named after." Webb's jaw tightened. "Not named after. Named for. There's a difference. The founder died 20 years ago," Vance said slowly. "Everyone knows that. Everyone knows wrong." Webb turned back to Nathaniel, and the hardness in his face softened into something approaching reverence. "Captain, I would like to introduce you to Nathaniel Thorne, call sign architect, founder of the Special Operations Training Program, author of the doctrine manual every operator in this country has memorized. The man who built everything you see around you from nothing but vision and willpower and more courage than you will ever understand." Vance's face cycled through disbelief, confusion, and finally landed on defensive skepticism. "That is impossible. Thorne would be 84 years old," Nathaniel said. "Born March 15th, 1942, in Duluth, Minnesota. Enlisted Army at 17. Commissioned through OCS in 1963. Served 2 tours in Vietnam before being recruited for Special Operations. Founded this program in 1974. Retired in 1995. He paused, a thin smile crossing his weathered face. Declared dead by popular assumption approximately 20 years ago. Vance shook his head. Anyone could memorize those facts. That does not prove anything. Webb reached into his breast pocket and withdrew his phone. He pulled up a photograph and turned the screen toward Vance. The image showed a wall in an office, covered with framed pictures and memorabilia. In the center, a black and white photograph of a young man in combat gear, his face lean and hard, his eyes carrying the same quiet intensity that now looked out from beneath white eyebrows and weathered skin. "That photograph has been on my wall for 30 years, Webb said. "I have looked at it every single day. I know that face better than I know my own." Vance stared at the phone, then at Nathaniel, then back at the phone. The MPs had released their grip on Nathaniel's arm somewhere during the exchange. They stood uncertainly, looking to their captain for guidance that was not coming. Nathaniel barely noticed. His attention had returned to the parade ground, to the stage where the ceremony's participants were beginning to take their places. A general with 4 stars on his shoulders, a senator adjusting his tie, the academy commandant in her dress uniform, her chest heavy with ribbons, and Elena, still in her seat, still touching the compass at her throat, still unaware that her grandfather was standing 50 meters away, fighting a battle she knew nothing about. The memory came unbidden, as memories always did when his guard was down. This same ground, before the buildings existed, a group of 12 men standing in formation while a young colonel addressed them. "You are the first," Nathaniel had told them. "Everything that comes after this starts with you. If we fail, they will use our failure as proof that this cannot be done. So we will not fail." They had not failed. Those 12 men had become the foundation of something that would reshape American military doctrine for 50 years. 8 of them were dead now. 2 were in nursing homes, their minds stolen by age and trauma. 1 had disappeared into the mountains of Montana and refused all contact. And 1 was Elijah Webb, standing before him with tears streaming down his face. "Sir," Webb said softly, "why did you disappear? Why did you let everyone think you were gone?" Nathaniel was silent for a long moment. On the stage, the commandant was testing the microphone. The ceremony would begin soon. Time was running out. "My son," he finally said, "Robert, after Margaret died, he asked me to stay away, to let Elena grow up without the burden of who I was. He thought my legacy was a weight she should not have to carry." Webb's expression shifted. "Your granddaughter, Cadet Thorne Matthews." "Yes. She is graduating today. Top of her class." "I know. She was selected for the program." Nathaniel closed his eyes. "I know." The silence stretched between them. Somewhere in the distance, a band was warming up, brass instruments catching the sunlight. The flags on the main pole snapped in a breeze that carried the smell of cut grass and possibility. "Does she know?" Webb asked. "Does she know who you are?" "She thinks I died when she was 3. Nathaniel opened his eyes. His voice was steady, but something in it had fractured. "Her father thought it was better that way. And I respected his wishes. For 19 years, I stayed away. I watched from a distance. I never reached out." "Then why are you here now?" Nathaniel's hand moved to his abdomen, pressing against the pain that lived there constantly now. "Because I am dying, Elijah. Pancreatic cancer. 3 to 6 months, they tell me. Probably closer to 3. He paused, his gaze returning to Elena. "I could not leave without seeing her one more time, without knowing that what I built would continue through her." Webb's face crumpled. "Sir, I do not want recognition. I do not want to disrupt her day. I just wanted to watch, to see her receive her commission, to know that something good came from all of it." Captain Vance had been listening in silence, his earlier contempt replaced by something more complicated. He cleared his throat. "Sir, I did not know. How could I have known?" "You could not," Nathaniel said simply. "That was rather the point." The ceremony's opening music began to play, a martial arrangement that echoed across the parade ground. Cadets were rising to their feet. Families in the reserve section were quieting their conversations. The moment was arriving. Webb straightened, decision crystallizing in his eyes. "Sir, you cannot watch from back here. You need to be in the front. You need to see her properly." "No." Nathaniel shook his head. "I told you. I do not want to interfere." "With respect, sir," Webb said, "you founded this program. Half the people on that stage were trained using methods you developed. You have earned the right to sit in the front row." "My son is here," Nathaniel said quietly. "Robert, he is in the family section. If he sees me, then he sees you." Webb's voice hardened with 30 years of lessons learned from the man before him. "Sir, you taught me that the hardest battles are the ones we fight with ourselves. You taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else is more important." He stepped closer. "You came 400 miles to see your granddaughter. You're not going to watch from behind a tree." Nathaniel looked at him for a long moment, then past him toward the parade ground where Elena was taking her place among her fellow graduates. The pain in his abdomen pulsed. The weakness in his legs trembled. The cancer that was killing him whispered that none of this mattered, that he should have stayed in the facility, that he should have let the silence continue until it became permanent. But Elena was touching the compass at her throat, and somewhere in that gesture was Margaret, and everything they had built together, and everything he had sacrificed. "All right," he said softly. "All right." Webb led the way through the crowd, his sergeant major's insignia parting the sea of families and visitors like a blade through water. The two MPs trailed behind, their earlier aggression replaced by uncertain deference. Captain Vance followed at a distance, his face unreadable, still processing the collision between what he had believed and what he now knew. Nathaniel walked slowly, each step costing more than he wanted to admit. The cancer had been stealing his strength in increments for months, and the journey from the care facility had depleted reserves he could not replenish. But he kept moving. He had walked through jungles with shrapnel in his leg. He had crawled through tunnels with a collapsed lung. He could manage 50 meters across a parade ground. The family section was arranged in neat rows of white folding chairs, each one occupied by parents and siblings and grandparents who had come to watch their children become officers. They sat with programs in their laps and phones in their hands, ready to capture the moment their loved ones walked across the stage. Nathaniel's eyes found Robert before Webb could guide him to a seat. His son was sitting in the third row, his posture rigid, his attention fixed on the stage where Elena would soon appear. He had aged since the funeral, gray threading through hair that had once been dark as Nathaniel's own. His jaw carried the same stubborn set it had worn since childhood, the same expression that had greeted every broken promise and missed milestone. Robert had not seen him yet. There was still time to turn back, to watch from the shadows as he had planned, to let his son have this day without the complication of a ghost walking back into his life. Webb sensed his hesitation. "Sir?" Nathaniel did not answer. He was remembering another ceremony 43 years ago, Robert's high school graduation. Nathaniel had promised to be there, had sworn on everything he held sacred that nothing would keep him away. Then the phone had rung at 3 in the morning, and 12 hours later, he was on a transport to a country he still could not name, doing things that would never appear in any official record. He had watched the graduation video 6 months later, alone in a hospital bed in Germany, his body broken in ways the doctors said would never fully heal. Margaret had held the camera. Her voice narrated each moment, describing what Robert was wearing, how proud he looked, how his eyes kept searching the crowd for a father who was not there. He never stopped looking, Margaret had said. Even when they called his name, he was still looking. Nathaniel had watched that video 17 times. He still remembered the exact moment Robert's face changed, the instant when hope collapsed into something harder and more permanent. The boy who had kept looking became a man who stopped. "Sir." Webb's voice was gentle but firm. "We should find you a seat." Nathaniel nodded slowly. He allowed Webb to guide him toward an empty chair at the end of a row, a position that offered a clear view of the stage while remaining partially obscured from the family section. It was a compromise, visibility without confrontation. But compromises, like plans, rarely survive contact with reality. Robert turned his head at the movement. His eyes swept across the new arrivals, registered Webb's uniform and the elderly man beside him, and moved on. Then they snapped back. For a moment, nothing happened. Robert stared at his father with an expression that contained multitudes. Shock, disbelief, a flash of something that might have been hope before it was smothered by 2 decades of practiced indifference. Then he was on his feet. The woman beside him, a blonde in a navy dress who must have been his wife, reached for his arm with a questioning look. Robert ignored her. He pushed past the knees of the people in his row and emerged into the aisle just as Nathaniel was lowering himself into his seat. "What are you doing here?" Robert's voice was low but intense, pitched to avoid drawing attention from the surrounding families. His hands were clenched at his sides, his whole body vibrating with tension. Nathaniel looked up at his son. The pain in his abdomen chose that moment to flare, and he pressed his hand against his ribs to steady himself. "Robert, it has been a long time. Answer me. What are you doing here?" "I came to see Elena." "You have no right." Robert's voice cracked on the last word. "You gave up that right." "We agreed." "I know." "Then why?" Nathaniel was silent. How could he explain? How could he compress 19 years of watching from a distance, of tracking Elena's achievements through back channels and anonymous inquiries, of sending scholarship money through intermediaries so she would never know its source? How could he articulate the weight of a terminal diagnosis, the urgency of running out of time? I am dying, Robert. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Robert's expression flickered, his anger colliding with something older and more complicated. What? Pancreatic cancer. The same thing that took your mother. Nathaniel's voice was steady, clinical, the way he had always delivered difficult intelligence. 3 to 6 months. Probably less. Robert stood motionless. The ceremony's opening music swelled around them, brass and drums building toward the processional. Families were settling into their seats, cameras being raised, programs being folded. You came here to tell me you were dying? No. Nathaniel shook his head slowly. I came here to see her. Just to see her. I was going to watch from the back and leave. I was not going to interfere. But you were interfering. Robert's voice rose slightly before he caught himself. You are here. She might see you. She might. She will not recognize me. Nathaniel gestured at himself, at the windbreaker and the white hair and the body that cancer had whittled down to angles and shadows. Look at me, Robert. I'm not the man in the photographs. I'm not the statue outside the building. I'm just an old man in a crowd. You think that matters? Robert leaned closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. She has spent her entire life in your shadow. Do you know why she chose this path? Why she applied to this academy, this program? Because of you. Because Mom told her stories about her legendary grandfather before she died. Because Elena wanted to be like a man she never knew, a man she believed was dead. Nathaniel closed his eyes. The weight of it pressed down on him, heavier than the cancer, heavier than the years. I know, he said. You know. Robert laughed bitterly. You know. That is all you ever say. You knew you were missing my childhood. You knew Mom was dying alone while you were in some jungle somewhere. You knew Elena needed a grandfather who was present, not a legend who was absent. And you still. He stopped. His voice had risen enough to draw glances from nearby families. The blonde woman was standing now, moving toward them with concern on her face. Robert. Nathaniel opened his eyes. I am not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to see her. One last time. Father and son stared at each other across a gulf that 19 years of silence had carved between them. The processional music reached its crescendo. On the stage, the commandant was approaching the podium. And in the cadets section, Elena Thorne Matthews rose to her feet with her classmates, her hand brushing the compass at her throat, completely unaware that 50 feet away, her family was fracturing and reforming around a ghost who had refused to stay dead. The blonde woman reached them before Robert could respond. Her hand found his arm, her eyes moving between her husband and the elderly stranger with growing concern. Robert, what is going on? Who is this? Robert's jaw worked silently. The question hung in the air, demanding an answer he did not want to give. Finally, without looking at her, he spoke. Karen, this is my father. Karen's face cycled through confusion to shock to something approaching wonder. She turned to Nathaniel with wide eyes. Your father? But I thought. Robert told me his father passed away years ago. Nathaniel said nothing. This was not his lie to explain. Robert exhaled slowly, the sound carrying the weight of 2 decades of deception. I told you what I needed to tell you, what I needed to believe. The commandant's voice echoed across the parade ground, welcoming families and distinguished guests to the commissioning ceremony. The words washed over the 3 of them, meaningless noise against the gravity of the moment. Karen looked at her husband with an expression that mixed hurt with understanding. We have been married for 12 years. 12 years, Robert. And your father has been alive this whole time? It is complicated. It is always complicated with your family. Karen shook her head, but there was no anger in her voice. Just exhaustion. She turned to Nathaniel. Sir, I do not know what happened between you and my husband. I do not know why he told me you were dead. But I know that Elena has spent her entire life wondering about you, wondering who you were, wondering if she would have made you proud. Nathaniel's throat tightened. She makes me proud every day. Then Maybe you should tell her that yourself. Robert stepped forward. Karen, you do not understand. He cannot just walk back in her life. Not today. Not like this. Why not? Karen's voice sharpened. Because it is inconvenient? Because it complicates the narrative you have been building for 19 years? She gestured toward the stage where Elena sat among her fellow cadets. That girl has achieved everything she has achieved while carrying a ghost on her shoulders. She deserves to know the ghost is real. The ceremony continued around them. The general was speaking now, his voice amplified across the parade ground, delivering platitudes about service and sacrifice that meant nothing to the three people standing at the edge of the family section. Webb appeared at Nathaniel's elbow. Sir, you should sit. The commissioning will begin soon. Nathaniel did not move. His eyes were fixed on Robert, on the son he had failed in 1,000 ways across 4 decades. The son who had built walls to protect himself from a father who could not stop leaving. Robert, he said quietly, I know I do not deserve to be here. I know I forfeited the right to be part of her life when I honored your request to stay away. But I am asking you, not for myself, for her. Let me watch. Just let me watch. Robert's face was a battlefield. Anger warred with grief, resentment with something older and more painful. The little boy who had kept looking for his father in the crowd, who had never stopped hoping even when hope became a wound that would not heal. You left, Robert said. His voice was barely audible. Every single time, you left. I know. Mom died alone because you were on a mission. A mission. She spent her last 3 days asking for you, and you were in a jungle somewhere doing things you still cannot tell me about. Nathaniel closed his eyes. The memory was a blade that never dulled. Margaret in the hospital bed, her hand reaching for someone who was not there. The message that reached him 36 hours too late. The flight home to a funeral where his son would not meet his eyes. I know, he said again. The words were inadequate. They had always been inadequate. Do you? Do you know what it was like to hold her hand while she died? To tell her you were coming when I knew you might not make it? To watch her face when she finally understood that you were not going to be there? I know. Robert's composure shattered. Then how could you? How could you keep choosing them over us? Over her? Over me? The question echoed across 19 years of silence. Nathaniel opened his eyes and looked at his son, truly looked at him for the first time since the funeral. He saw the little boy who had watched from the window, waiting for headlights that never came. He saw the teenager who had stopped asking when Dad would be home. He saw the man who had built a life specifically designed to exclude the father who had excluded him. Because I was wrong, Nathaniel said. The words fell into the space between them like stones into deep water. Robert stared at him, his anger faltering. What? I was wrong. Nathaniel's voice was steady, but something in it had cracked open. I told myself the mission mattered more. I told myself I was building something important, something that would protect people, that would save lives. And I was. But I was also running from the responsibility of being present, from the fear of failing you in small ways. So I failed you in the largest way possible instead. Robert said nothing. His eyes were bright with tears he would not let fall. I cannot undo it. I cannot give you back the childhood I stole from you. I cannot give Margaret back the husband she deserved. I cannot give Elena back the grandfather she should have had. Nathaniel paused, his hand pressing against the pain in his abdomen. But I am here now, dying, running out of time. And I am asking you, Robert, not as your father, as a man who knows he failed. Let me see her, just this once. Then I will go, and you will never have to see me again. The ceremony droned on. The general had finished speaking. The commandant was introducing the senator who would deliver the keynote address. Time was collapsing around them, the moment of Elena's commissioning approaching like a tide that could not be stopped. Robert wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. A gesture so familiar, so achingly reminiscent of the boy he had been, that Nathaniel felt his heart crack along fault lines he had thought were fully mapped. She has your compass, Robert said quietly. Mom gave it to her before she died. Told her it belonged to the bravest man she ever knew. I know. Nathaniel's voice was barely a whisper. I saw it. She wears it every day. Robert looked toward the stage, toward his daughter, sitting straight and proud among her fellow cadets. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. She's going to have questions. I will answer them. Whatever she wants to know. Even the parts you could never tell me? Nathaniel hesitated, then nodded. The classifications had expired years ago. The secrets he had kept were no longer secrets, just history buried in files no one read anymore. Even those. Robert was silent for a long moment. The senator's voice washed over them. Words about duty and honor and the sacred trust of leadership. Empty words. Ceremony words. The real ceremony was happening here, in the space between a father and son who had forgotten how to speak to each other. Finally, Robert turned back to face him. His expression had changed. The anger was still there, but had been joined by something else. Something that might have been the first tentative step towards something neither of them had names for. "Sit down," he said. "The commissioning starts in 10 minutes. Nathaniel lowered himself into the folding chair slowly, his body grateful for the reprieve, even as his mind raced ahead to what was coming. Robert sat beside him, Karen on his other side, a fragile truce forming in the space between them. Webb positioned himself at the end of the row, standing at parade rest, his presence a silent declaration that the old man in the windbreaker was under his protection. Captain Vance had disappeared somewhere into the crowd, his earlier certainty replaced by a confusion he would need time to process. On stage, the senator was reaching the conclusion of his keynote address. His words floated across the parade ground, polished phrases about sacrifice and service that had been focus-grouped into meaninglessness. Nathaniel had heard 100 speeches like it, had given a few himself, in the early days when the Pentagon trotted him out as proof that their investment in special operations was paying dividends. He did not listen to the senator. His attention was fixed on Elena. She sat in the second row of cadets, her posture perfect, her eyes forward. The morning light caught the compass at her throat every time she breathed, a small golden flash that connected her to a past she did not fully understand. She had no idea that her grandfather was watching, no idea that the legend she had built her identity around was sitting 50 feet away, dying by degrees, desperate for one glimpse of her face. "What are you going to say to her?" Robert's voice was low, pitched beneath the senator's amplified platitudes. He was not looking at Nathaniel. His eyes remained fixed on the stage, on his daughter. "I do not know," Nathaniel admitted. "You should have a plan. You always had a plan. That was what Mom used to say. Nathaniel always has a plan." The words carried an edge, but it was duller than before. Worn down by the conversation they had just had, by the admissions that hung between them like bridges half-built. Some things cannot be planned. Robert made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That is not what you taught your operators." Nathaniel turned to look at his son. Robert's profile was sharp against the morning light, so much like Margaret's that it hurt. "My operators were going into combat. This is different, is it?" The question lingered. Nathaniel considered it, turning it over the way he had once turned over mission parameters and contingency plans. Was this so different? He was about to engage with an unknown variable, a young woman whose reaction he could not predict. He was operating without intelligence, without backup, without extraction options. "No," he admitted. "I suppose it is not." The senator finished his speech to polite applause. The commandant returned to the podium, her voice crisp with military precision as she announced the beginning of the commissioning ceremony. Cadets began to rise in groups, moving toward the stage in alphabetical order. Nathaniel's heart rate increased. Elena's surname would place her near the end of the procession. He had time, a few more minutes to prepare, to find the words that had eluded him for 19 years. But preparation was a luxury the universe had decided to deny him. A commotion rippled through the VIP section at the front of the parade ground. Nathaniel saw Webb stiffen, his attention shifting toward the disturbance. A woman in a general's uniform was speaking urgently with several aides, her face cycling through expressions of shock and disbelief. Lieutenant General Patricia Harmon, the Academy Commandant, one of Nathaniel's final students before his retirement. "Webb," Nathaniel said quietly. "What is happening?" "I do not know, sir. But General Harmon is looking this way." She was Her eyes had found Webb in the crowd, had followed his position to the row of folding chairs where Nathaniel sat. Even from this distance, Nathaniel could see the moment recognition struck her. Her face went pale. Her hand reached out to grip the arm of the aide beside her. "Someone told her," Robert said. His voice was tight. "Someone told her you are here." "Webb probably radioed ahead," Nathaniel replied. He would have thought it appropriate to alert the commandant. "And now she's going to make a scene." Nathaniel watched Harmon speak rapidly to her aides, watched them scatter in different directions with the urgency of people given impossible orders. The ceremony continued around them, cadets walking across the stage one by one, receiving their commissions, becoming officers. But a second current was moving beneath the surface now, rippling outward from the VIP section. "I should leave." Nathaniel began to rise. "Before this becomes something Elena has to deal with." Robert's hand closed around his arm. The grip was firm, stronger than Nathaniel expected. "No, Robert. You spent 19 years leaving." His son's voice cracked. "You left when I was born. You left when I graduated. You left when Mom was dying. You do not get to leave again. Not now. Not when you finally showed up." The words hit Nathaniel like rounds from a weapon he had not seen coming. He sank back into the chair, his strength failing, his carefully constructed walls crumbling. On stage, the ceremony continued. Names were being called, hands were being shaken, second lieutenants were being minted one by one. The alphabet marched inexorably forward, and General Harmon was walking toward them. She moved through the crowd with purpose, her aides trailing behind her like the tail of a comet. Families parted before her, recognizing the stars on her shoulders, the authority in her bearing. She did not stop until she was standing directly in front of Nathaniel's row. "Sir," she said. Her voice was barely controlled, trembling at the edges. "Is it really you?" Nathaniel looked up at the woman who had once been a young captain, hungry to prove herself in a world that doubted female operators could succeed. He had believed in her when others had not, had pushed her harder than anyone else in her class because he knew she could handle it, had written the recommendation that launched her career toward the stars she now wore. "Hello, Patricia," he said. "You have done well." Her composure shattered. Tears spilled down her cheeks, cutting tracks through foundation that had been applied with military precision. "We thought you were dead. We all thought you were dead. I am sorry." "Sorry." She laughed, the sound wet and broken. "You disappear for 20 years. Let everyone who loved you think you are gone. And you're sorry?" On the stage, the names had reached the S section. Elena's turn was approaching. Nathaniel could see her standing now, waiting in line, her hand touching the compass like a talisman. "Patricia," he said gently, "I will explain everything. But right now my granddaughter is about to be commissioned, and I would very much like to watch." Harmon followed his gaze to the stage. To Elena, understanding dawned in her eyes. "Thor Matthews," she said slowly. "I should have seen it. She has your eyes. She has her grandmother's eyes," Nathaniel corrected softly. "She has Margaret's eyes." The general wiped her face with the back of her hand, a gesture that stripped away decades of rank and protocol. "Then we will watch together. And afterward, you and I are going to have a very long conversation." She sat down beside Webb, her presence adding another layer of protection around the old man who had shaped so many lives and then vanished in a shadow. On stage, a name was called that made Nathaniel's heart stop. Cadet Elena Maria Torne Mateos. And his granddaughter began to walk toward her future. Elena walked across the stage with the measured precision of someone who had practiced this moment 1,000 times in her mind. Her shoulders were square, her chin level, her eyes fixed on the officer waiting to administer her oath. Every step carried the weight of 4 years of training, of sleepless nights and impossible standards, of a dream she had chased since she was old enough to understand what her grandfather had built. Nathaniel could not breathe. She was beautiful, not just in appearance, though she had inherited the best of both her parents. Beautiful in the way she moved, confident without arrogance. Beautiful in the way she held herself, strong without rigidity. Beautiful in the way his compass caught the light at her throat, a golden thread connecting her to a history she had only known through stories. She has no idea, Robert murmured. No idea you were watching. Nathaniel said nothing. His throat had closed around words he could not form. On stage, Elena reached the officer and snapped to attention. Her voice rang out clear and strong as she raised her right hand and began to recite the oath of office. I, Elena Marie Thorne Matthews, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The words washed over Nathaniel like a tide. He had administered this oath himself hundreds of times to young men and women who would go on to do extraordinary things in the shadows of history. He had believed in every one of them, but none of them had been his blood. None of them had worn his compass against their heart. That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. General Harmon leaned closer. She is exceptional, she whispered. Top of her class in every metric. The instructors say she has instincts they cannot teach. Natural gifts that remind them of. She stopped herself, but Nathaniel knew what she had been about to say. That remind them of the founder. That I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. Elena's voice did not waver. Her hand did not tremble. She stood on that stage like she had been born for this moment, like every choice she had ever made had been leading her here. And Nathaniel finally understood what he had been running from all these years. Not the responsibility of being present, not the fear of failing in small ways. He had been running from this, from the overwhelming, terrifying weight of loving someone so completely that their success felt like redemption and their pain felt like damnation. He had loved Margaret this way, had loved Robert this way, and he had run from both of them because staying meant risking the kind of loss that could destroy a man more thoroughly than any bullet or bomb. And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter. Elena lowered her hand. The officer before her smiled and extended his own hand to shake hers. Congratulations, Second Lieutenant Thorne Matthews. The crowd erupted in applause. Families rose to their feet, cameras flashing, voices calling out names and congratulations. The moment Nathaniel had traveled 400 miles to witness was over in less than 30 seconds. But those 30 seconds had changed everything. Elena turned to face the crowd, searching for her father in the sea of faces. Her eyes found Robert first, found Karen beside him, found the tears streaming down both their faces. She smiled, that brilliant smile that was so much like Margaret's, and raised her hand in a small wave. Then her gaze shifted. It moved past her father to the elderly man sitting beside him. The man in the faded windbreaker with white hair and weathered skin. The man who was looking at her with an expression she did not recognize but somehow understood. Her smile faltered. Nathaniel saw the moment confusion entered her eyes. Saw her hand drift unconsciously to the compass at her throat. Saw her lips part as if to ask a question she did not know how to form. The ceremony continued around them. Other names were being called, other cadets walking across the stage, other families celebrating. But Elena had stopped moving. She stood at the edge of the stage, frozen, her eyes locked on the old man who was looking at her like she was the answer to a prayer he had been too afraid to speak. Robert stood. Elena, he called out, his voice cutting through the noise. Come here. She walked toward them like someone moving through a dream. Her fellow cadets flowed around her, heading toward their own families, but she did not notice them. Her attention was fixed on the row of chairs where her father sat beside a stranger who was not a stranger at all. She reached them and stopped. Up close, Nathaniel could see the questions forming behind her eyes, could see her mind working, comparing the face before her to photographs she had studied, to the bronze statue she had passed every day for 4 years. Dad, she said slowly, who is this? Robert opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, General Harmon rose to her feet. Second Lieutenant Thorne Matthews, the general said formally, I would like to introduce you to someone. Elena turned to face her commandant, her training overriding her confusion. Mom? Harmon's voice carried across the surrounding families, drawing their attention. This man taught me everything I know about leadership. He created the program you just joined. He wrote the doctrine you have studied for 4 years. His methods have saved more lives than any of us will ever know. Elena's face went pale. Her hand tightened around the compass. Second Lieutenant, General Harmon continued, her voice breaking slightly. I would like you to meet your grandfather, Colonel Nathaniel Ton, the architect. The world went silent. Elena stared at Nathaniel. Her lips moved, forming words that produced no sound. Her eyes searched his face, finding the jawline she recognized from photographs, the eyes that matched the portrait in the building's entrance, the posture that echoed the bronze statue she had walked past 1,000 times. That is impossible, she whispered. He died. He died when I was 3. Nathaniel rose slowly from his chair. His legs trembled. His heart pounded against ribs that felt too fragile to contain it. He stood before his granddaughter for the first time in 19 years, close enough to touch her, close enough to see the tears forming in eyes that were Margaret's eyes, that were his mother's eyes, that were a direct line to everything he had loved and lost. I am sorry, he said. His voice was barely audible. I am so sorry, Elena. She did not move, did not speak. The compass rose and fell against her chest with each rapid breath. And then her hand reached out and touched his face. Her fingers traced the lines that time had carved into his skin. They moved across his cheekbone, his jaw, the weathered terrain of a life she had only known through legends. She touched him the way a blind person might touch a sculpture, learning through contact what sight could not confirm. You are real, she breathed. You are actually real. I am real. Her composure shattered. She fell into his arms with a sound that was half sob and half laugh, and Nathaniel caught her the way he had caught her once before, 19 years ago, when she was 3 years old and the world was still full of possibilities he would spend the next 2 decades destroying. He held her. He held his granddaughter for the first time since she was a child, and the walls he had built across a lifetime of running finally, completely, irreparably collapsed. The embrace lasted an eternity and ended too soon. Elena pulled back, her face streaked with tears, her composure in ruins. Around them, the ceremony had ground to a halt. Cadets and families stood frozen, watching the scene unfold with the hushed reverence of people witnessing something they did not fully understand but knew was sacred. I do not understand, Elena said. Her voice was raw, scraped clean of the military precision she had displayed on stage. Dad told me you died. Mom told me you died. Everyone told me you died. Nathaniel looked at Robert. His son stood rigid beside Karen, his own tears falling freely now. The wall he had built between his father and his daughter was crumbling in real time, and Nathaniel could see the fear in his eyes. Fear that Elena would hate him for the lie. Fear that the truth would be worse than the fiction. Your father was protecting you, Nathaniel said carefully. He was protecting you from me. Elena shook her head. From you? You are a legend. You built this entire program. Your name is on the building. Your face is on the wall. How could he possibly need to protect me from you? Because legends make terrible fathers. The words came from Robert. He stepped forward, positioning himself between his father and his daughter. His body language caught somewhere between confrontation and collapse. Elena, he said, I need to explain. Yes. Her voice hardened. You do. Robert exhaled slowly. When you were 3 years old, your grandfather came to visit us. It was the first time he had been home in almost a year. He was supposed to stay for your birthday. Do you remember what I told you about that birthday? Elena's brow furrowed. You said there was an accident. That grandpa got sick and had to go away. There was no accident. Robert's voice cracked. He got a phone call. Some mission, some emergency, some situation that needed the architect more than a 3-year-old needed her grandfather. He left before the cake was cut. He left while you were still asking where he went. Nathaniel closed his eyes. The memory was a wound that had never healed. Elena in her party dress, running to the window, pressing her small hands against the glass. Where did Grandpa go? When is he coming back? He had promised himself he would make it up to her. Had promised Margaret he would do better. But the missions kept coming, and the promises kept breaking, and eventually there were no more promises left to make. When your grandmother got sick, Robert continued, "Your grandfather was on assignment. Some operation he still cannot talk about. She asked for him every day. Every single day, for 3 weeks, she asked if he was coming. And I had to tell her yes. I had to lie to my dying mother, because the truth would have broken her heart." Elena turned to face Nathaniel. Her expression had shifted from wonder to something more complicated, more painful. "Is that true?" "Yes," Nathaniel said. "It is true. She was alone when she died." Robert's voice rose. "I was there. Karen was there. But the one person she wanted, the one person she had spent 40 years waiting for, was in a jungle somewhere, saving strangers while his wife died, asking for him." The words hit Nathaniel like artillery. He had heard them before, at the funeral, screamed across Margaret's grave, while mourners pretended not to notice. But hearing them now, in front of Elena, in front of the program he had built and the legacy he had hoped would outlive his failures, was different. It was worse. After the funeral, Robert said, he showed up, just appeared like a ghost, standing at the back of the cemetery, like he had any right to be there. And I told him to leave. I told him that if he could not be there for Mom when she was alive, he did not get to pretend to mourn her when she was dead. Elena looked between her father and grandfather. The compass at her throat caught the light, a small golden accusation. "And you agreed," she said to Nathaniel. "You just left. Your father asked me to stay away from you." Nathaniel's voice was steady, but something beneath it was fracturing. "He said you would be better off believing I was dead than knowing I was alive and choosing not to be present." And I thought he was right. You thought he was right. I had failed everyone I ever loved, Elena. Your grandmother. Your father. I did not want to fail you too. So I stayed away. I watched from a distance. I followed your achievements through back channels and anonymous inquiries. But I never reached out. Because I believe your father was right. Because I believe you deserved better than a ghost who could not stop leaving." Elena was silent for a long moment. The parade ground had gone quiet around them. Even the cadets who had been celebrating with their families had turned to watch, drawn by the gravity of what was unfolding. "You watch from a distance," she said slowly. "What does that mean?" "It means I was at your high school graduation. Back row, left side. You wore a blue dress and your mother's pearls." Nathaniel's voice softened. "It means I was at your acceptance ceremony when you got into the academy. I stood behind a tree near the parking lot. You hugged your father and cried." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. "It means I have a photograph of every major moment of your life for the past 19 years. Every birthday I could get close enough to see. Every achievement I could witness from the shadows." Nathaniel reached into his satchel and withdrew a worn envelope. He held it out to her. "I cannot be present, but I was never truly absent." Elena took the envelope with trembling hands. She opened it and withdrew a stack of photographs, each one documenting a moment from her life. Her 10th birthday party, her first soccer game, her prom night, her mother's funeral, where a figure in the background stood apart from the mourners, face turned toward the grave. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "You were there. You were at Mom's funeral. I could not stay away." Nathaniel's voice broke. "Sarah was like a daughter to me. She was the only one who still wrote to me, who still sent photographs and updates. When she died, I lost my last connection to you, my last window into your life." Elena looked at the photograph in her hand. The figure in the background was blurry, distant, but unmistakably real. "Does Dad know?" Robert shook his head slowly. His face had gone pale. "No, I did not know." The three of them stood in silence. 3 generations of a family broken by absence and rebuilt on lies, finally confronting the truth that had been hiding in plain sight for 2 decades. General Harmon stepped forward. Her voice was gentle but firm. Perhaps this conversation should continue somewhere more private. Elena looked at her commandant, then at her father, then at the grandfather she had mourned for 19 years. "No," she said. Her voice was stronger now, steadier. "We have been hiding for long enough. All of us." She turned to face Nathaniel fully. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. The second lieutenant who had walked across the stage moments ago was back, tempered now by something deeper and more profound. "I have questions," she said. "A lot of questions, and you are going to answer every single one of them." Nathaniel looked at his granddaughter. at the woman she had become, at the officer she now was, at the future she represented. Yes, he said, I will answer every single one. General Harmon led them to the conference room inside the Thorne Special Operations Training Center. The irony was not lost on anyone. Nathaniel walked through doors that bore his name, past walls lined with photographs of graduates he had trained, beneath plaques commemorating achievements built on foundations he had laid. He had never seen any of it. The building had been constructed 5 years after his retirement, dedicated in a ceremony he had not attended. He had received an invitation, forwarded through 3 different channels, to reach him at the cabin in Vermont where he had been hiding from the world. He had thrown it away unopened. Now he stood in the center of a room dedicated to his legacy, surrounded by people whose lives he had shaped and shattered in equal measure. Elena sat across from him at the conference table. Robert and Karen flanked her on either side. Webb stood at attention near the door, as if guarding against interruption. Harmon had positioned herself at the head of the table, her rank temporarily suspended in favor of something more personal. The photographs Elena had taken from the envelope were spread across the table between them. 19 years of her life, documented in stolen moments and distant glimpses. Evidence of a presence she had never known existed. Start from the beginning, Elena said. Her voice was controlled, professional, but Nathaniel could hear the tremor beneath it. Tell me who you really are. Nathaniel looked at the photographs. At the little girl in the blue birthday dress. At the teenager in the soccer uniform. At the young woman in the black dress at her mother's funeral. At the cadet who had just become an officer. I was born in Duluth, Minnesota, he began. March 15th, 1942. My father worked in the iron mines. My mother cleaned houses for families who looked through her like she was furniture. I enlisted in the Army at 17 because I wanted to be something more than invisible. He paused. The words came slowly, dredged up from depths he had kept sealed for decades. I was good at being a soldier, good at following orders, good at not asking questions. They noticed. The people who look for young men with certain skills noticed. I was recruited into a program that did not officially exist, trained in methods that were never written down, sent to places that were never acknowledged. Vietnam, Elena said quietly. You served in Vietnam. 3 tours. Nathaniel's voice flattened into the clinical tone of a mission debrief. The first 2 were conventional. The third was something else entirely. I cannot tell you the operational details, even now, but I can tell you that I learned things about myself during those years, about what I was capable of, about what I was willing to do. He looked at Robert. His son's face was carved from stone, but his eyes were wet. When I came home, I was not the same person who had left. I had seen things, done things. I carried weight that I did not know how to put down. And I met your grandmother at an embassy reception in Saigon, and she looked at me like she could see through every wall I had built, and I fell in love with her before I finished my first sentence. Elena's hand drifted to the compass at her throat. Margaret saved me, Nathaniel continued. She gave me something to come home to, a reason to survive the missions that should have killed me. But she also became the thing I was most afraid of losing. And I learned, over time, that I was better at protecting strangers than protecting the people I loved. He spread his hands on the table, the scars on his knuckles catching the fluorescent light. I built this program because I believed we needed warriors who could think as well as fight, operators who could make judgment calls under impossible pressure. I poured everything I had into creating something that would outlast me. And in doing so, I neglected the family that needed me present more than the world needed another training doctrine. Robert made a sound. Low, wounded. Nathaniel forced himself to continue. Your grandmother waited for me. Year after year, mission after mission, she waited. She raised your father alone more often than not. She made excuses for my absences. She protected him from the truth of what I did and who I was. And when she got sick, when she needed me most, I was in a place I still cannot name, doing things that still cannot be acknowledged. His voice broke. She died asking for me, and I was not there. I will carry that failure until the day I die, which, as it happens, will not be long from now. Elena leaned forward. What do you mean? Pancreatic cancer. The same disease that took your grandmother. Nathaniel met her eyes steadily. 3 to 6 months. Probably closer to 3. The doctors wanted me to stay in the care facility. To die in a bed surrounded by machines and strangers. But I cannot do that. Not without seeing you one more time. The room went silent. Elena stared at him. The composed officer who had demanded answers was gone. In her place was a young woman confronting the reality that the grandfather she had just discovered was already slipping away. "You came here to die," she said. "I came here to see you become what I always knew you could be." Nathaniel's voice softened. "I came here to watch you receive your commission and know that something good came from all my failures. I was going to watch from the back and leave. I was never going to tell you who I was. But you did not leave. Your father stopped me." Nathaniel looked at Robert. For the first time in 20 years, he stopped me from running. Robert's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down his cheeks. He did not wipe them away. "I spent my whole life hating you," he said. "Hating you for leaving. Hating you for choosing them over us. Hating you for not being there when Mom died. And now you show up, and you are dying, and I do not know how to hate you anymore." "Then stop," Nathaniel said simply. "Stop hating me. Use whatever time we have left for something else." "For what?" "I do not know." Nathaniel's voice was barely above a whisper. "I never learned how to be a father. I never learned how to be present. But maybe in whatever time I have left, you could teach me." The silence stretched across the conference table. Harmon wiped her eyes. Webb stood motionless, tears tracking silently down his weathered face. Karen gripped Robert's hand so tightly her knuckles had gone white, and Elena rose from her chair. She walked around the table slowly, her footsteps echoing in the quiet room. She stopped in front of Nathaniel and looked down at the man who had founded empires and destroyed families and built legacies and broken promises. Then she knelt beside his chair and took his hand in hers. "I do not know how to forgive you," she said. "I do not know if I can forgive you. But I am not going to let you die alone. Not like Grandma. Not surrounded by strangers." Nathaniel looked at his granddaughter through tears he no longer had the strength to hide. "I do not deserve that," he said. "No," Elena agreed. "You do not. But that is not what this is about." "What is it about?" She squeezed his hand. The compass at her throat caught the light. "It is about being present," she said. "Finally. For whatever time we have left." The door to the conference room opened. Captain Marcus Vance stood in the doorway, his face pale, his earlier arrogance stripped away like paint in a sandstorm. Behind him, a crowd had gathered in the hallway. Cadets, officers, families who had heard whispers spreading across the parade ground like wildfire. "The founder is alive. Nathaniel Thorne is here. The architect has returned." Vance stepped into the room and stopped 3 feet from Nathaniel's chair. His throat worked silently for a moment before words finally emerged. "Sir," he said. His voice was hoarse. "I owe you an apology." Nathaniel looked up at the man who had tried to have him arrested less than an hour ago. The captain's hands were shaking. His eyes were red-rimmed. Whatever certainty had driven him earlier had been demolished by the weight of what he now understood. "You were doing your job," Nathaniel said quietly. "You had no way of knowing." "I should have known." Vance's voice cracked. "I work in your building. I walk past your photograph every day. I have read your doctrine manual 100 times. And I looked right at you and saw nothing but a confused old man who did not belong. That is exactly what I wanted you to see." Vance shook his head. "The cadets who mocked you. The MPs who grabbed your arms. The things I said to you." He swallowed hard. "Sir, I am ashamed." Nathaniel studied the younger man for a long moment. He saw the ambition that had driven Vance to perfect his security protocols. He saw the pride that had blinded him to what was standing right in front of him. He saw the devastation that came from realizing how badly he had failed. And he saw something else, something that reminded him of himself 50 years ago. "Captain," he said, "do you know why I created this program?" Vance blinked. "To train elite operators. To develop warriors who could think as well as fight." "No." Nathaniel shook his head slowly. "I created this program because I made mistakes. Because I watched good men die due to failures of judgment and training. Because I believe we could do better." He paused. The best lessons come from failures, Captain. The question is whether you learn from them or let them define you. Vance stood motionless. The crowd in the hallway had grown larger, pressing forward to catch glimpses of the living legend who had materialized in their midst. General Harmon rose from her seat. She moved to the doorway and addressed the gathered crowd with the commanding presence of someone accustomed to controlling chaos. The ceremony will resume in 30 minutes, she announced. Until then, I would ask that you give Colonel Thorne and his family privacy. There will be time for questions later. For now, let them have this moment. The crowd began to disperse reluctantly, whispers trailing behind them like smoke. Harmon closed the door and turned back to face the room. Nathaniel, she said, word is spreading. By this evening, every special operations community in the country will know you are alive. By tomorrow, the media will have the story. This is going to become something much larger than a family reunion. Nathaniel had expected this, had known from the moment Webb recognized him that anonymity was no longer possible. The ghost had stepped back into the light, and ghosts could not return to shadow once they had been seen. What do you suggest? He asked. Harmon exchanged a glance with Webb. We have a proposal, one that would honor your legacy while respecting your wishes for privacy. I am listening. Webb stepped forward. Sir, every year we hold a memorial ceremony for fallen operators. Names read aloud. Families honored. It is one of the most sacred traditions in the special operations community. He paused. This year's ceremony is in 3 weeks. We would like you to attend, not as a spectator, as the guest of honor. Nathaniel was silent. The request carried weight he was not sure he could bear. The men and women whose names are on that wall, Webb continued. Most of them trained using your methods. Many of them survived missions they should not have survived because of doctrines you developed. Their families deserve to meet the man who gave their loved ones the best possible chance. And the ones who did not survive? Nathaniel's voice was rough. The ones my methods cannot save? They deserve to have you honor their sacrifice. Webb's eyes were bright. Sir, you have spent 20 years hiding from what you built. Maybe it is time to stop hiding. Elena squeezed her grandfather's hand. She had not released it since she knelt beside his chair. 3 weeks, she said softly. The doctors gave you 3 to 6 months. You can make it 3 weeks. Nathaniel looked at his granddaughter, at the compass rising and falling against her chest, at the determination in her eyes that reminded him so much of Margaret it made his heart ache. And if I do not, then we will have had 3 weeks, Elena said. 3 weeks is more than we had this morning. Robert spoke for the first time since his breakdown. His voice was steadier now, tempered by something that might have been the beginning of acceptance. The cabin in Vermont, he said, the place where you have been hiding. Is it still yours? Yes, Nathaniel replied. I have owned it for 30 years. Then that is where you will stay. Robert met his father's eyes. With us, all of us, for whatever time you have left. The words hung in the air. An invitation that bridged 20 years of silence. An offer that Nathaniel had stopped believing he would ever receive. Robert, he began. Do not argue. His son's voice hardened. You do not get to argue. You showed up. You did not leave. Now you have to deal with the consequences. The consequences, Nathaniel repeated slowly. Family, Robert said. The consequence is family. You wanted to learn how to be present. You wanted me to teach you. He paused, and something in his expression softened. This is how it starts. Nathaniel looked around the room. At Harmon, who had once been a young captain desperate to prove herself. At Webb, who had once been a troubled sergeant with a death wish. At Karen, who had welcomed a ghost into her family without hesitation. At Robert, who was offering forgiveness without calling it that. And at Elena, his granddaughter, the future he had come to witness, and the present he had never expected to receive. All right, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. All right. Elena leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his shoulder. The gesture was gentle, almost childlike, a glimpse of the 3-year-old she had once been. Welcome home, Grandpa, she murmured. Finally, Nathaniel closed his eyes. The pain in his abdomen pulsed. The weakness in his limbs whispered that time was short. The cancer that was killing him did not care about reconciliation or legacy or the desperate hope that was blooming in his chest for the first time in decades. But for this moment, none of that mattered. For this moment, he was home. 3 weeks later, Nathaniel stood at the memorial wall. The names stretched across black granite in letters of gold, hundreds of them, each one representing a life given in service to a nation that would never fully know what they had sacrificed. He had trained many of them himself, had shaken their hands at graduation ceremonies, looked into their eyes, told them they were ready for whatever waited in the shadows. Some of them had been ready. Some of them had not. The wall did not distinguish between the two. Elena stood beside him in her dress uniform, her second lieutenant's bars gleaming in the afternoon light. She had requested leave to accompany him to the ceremony, and Harmon had granted it without hesitation. For the past 3 weeks, she had barely left his side. The Vermont cabin had become something Nathaniel had never expected. A home. Robert and Karen had moved in temporarily, converting the spare bedroom into a space where nurses could monitor his decline. Elena drove up every weekend, sometimes bringing fellow officers who wanted to meet the legend they had studied for years. And Nathaniel had learned, slowly and imperfectly, how to be present. He learned that Robert took his coffee black and could not sleep past 6 in the morning. He learned that Karen hummed while she cooked and had an encyclopedic knowledge of wildflowers. He learned that Elena bit her thumbnail when she was thinking hard about something and laughed with her whole body when something genuinely surprised her. Small things, ordinary things, the currency of family that he had never learned to spend. The memorial ceremony had drawn hundreds of attendees. Active duty operators, retired veterans, families of the fallen. Media had been kept at a distance by Harmon's insistence, but word had spread through the community with the speed of legend. The architect had returned. The founder was dying. This might be the last chance to see him. Nathaniel had spoken briefly at the beginning of the ceremony. His voice had been weak, his body failing, but his words had carried across the crowd with the weight of 5 decades of service. "I did not come here to be honored," he had said. "I came here to honor them. The names on this wall, the families who lost them, the brothers and sisters who carried on after they were gone. They are the legacy, not me, never me." The crowd had risen to its feet. The applause had lasted 4 minutes. Nathaniel had stood at attention throughout, supported by Elena on one side and Robert on the other, refusing to sit despite the pain that radiated through his body like fire. Now the ceremony was over. The crowds had dispersed. The families had paid their respects and departed. Only a small group remained at the wall, gathered around the old man who had outlived so many of the warriors he had created. Webb approached slowly. In his hands he carried a folded flag, the kind presented to families at military funerals. He stopped in front of Nathaniel and held it out. "Sir," he said, "this belonged to Sergeant First Class Michael Torres. He was one of your first graduates, class of 1975. He died in Mogadishu in 1993, saving 3 members of his team. His wife asked me to give this to you." Nathaniel's hands trembled as he accepted the flag. He remembered Torres, remembered a young man with a quick smile and faster reflexes who had struggled with the academic portions of the program until Nathaniel had stayed late every night for a month to tutor him personally. Torres had graduated 3rd in his class. He had served with distinction for 18 years. He had died at 41, leaving behind a wife and 2 daughters who had grown up without a father. Just like Robert. His wife, Webb continued, "She wanted you to know that Michael talked about you until the day he deployed for the last time. He said you were the reason he became the man he was, the reason he had the courage to do what needed to be done." Nathaniel pressed the flag against his chest. The weight of it was nothing. The weight of what it represented was everything. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for telling me." Webb saluted. Nathaniel returned it, his arms shaking with the effort. Elena guided him to a bench near the wall. He sat heavily, his strength finally failing, his body surrendering to the cancer that had been patient for so long. Robert sat on his other side. Karen stood behind them, her hands resting on her husband's shoulders. The sun was setting over the memorial, casting long shadows across the grass. The names on the wall seemed to glow in the golden light, each letter illuminated like a small flame. Nathaniel looked at the flag in his lap, at his son beside him, at his granddaughter in her uniform, at the wall that held the names of men and women who had given everything. I wasted so much time, he said softly. So many years running from the people who mattered most. Elena took his hand. You are here now. Is it enough? She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached up and unclasped the compass from around her neck. She pressed it into his palm, closing his fingers around the worn metal. Mom gave this to me before she died, she said. She told me it belonged to the bravest man she ever knew. She told me to carry it until I found my own courage. Nathaniel looked down at the compass. The same compass he had carried through 3 wars. The same compass Margaret had worn against her heart for 40 years. The same compass that had guided him, in ways he was only now beginning to understand, back to the family he had abandoned. I want you to have it back, Elena said. I found my courage. Now it is time for it to come home. Nathaniel's vision blurred. Tears he had held back for decades finally spilled down his weathered cheeks. He gripped the compass so tightly his knuckles went white. Robert's hand found his shoulder. Dad, he said. The word came out rough, unpracticed, strange on his tongue after so many years of avoidance. I do not know how to forgive you. I do not know if I ever will. But I'm glad you came back. Nathaniel looked at his son, at the gray in his hair and the lines around his eyes and the ghost of the little boy who had watched from windows, waiting for headlights that never came. I am sorry, he said, for all of it, for everything I missed, everything I broke. I am sorry. I know. Robert's voice cracked. I know you are. The sun continued its descent. The shadows lengthened across the memorial. Somewhere in the distance, a bugle began to play taps, the notes drifting across the grounds like a final benediction. Nathaniel closed his eyes. The compass was warm in his palm. His son's hand was steady on his shoulder. His granddaughter's presence was solid beside him. He thought about Margaret, about the life they had built and the life he had squandered, about the missions that had seemed so important and the moments that had mattered so much more. He thought about the names on the wall, the warriors he had trained, the legacy he had built from blood and doctrine, and the desperate hope that something good could come from so much sacrifice. And he thought about Elena, about the future she represented, about the program she would help lead and the operators she would help train and the legacy she would carry forward long after he was gone. If you're still watching this story, thank you for staying until the end. If it moved you, if it reminded you that it is never too late to come home, please subscribe to our channel and share in the comments below. Who is the quiet hero in your life that deserves recognition? Sometimes the greatest warriors are not the ones in uniform. Sometimes they are the ones who simply refuse to give up on the people they love. Thank you for watching. The bugle fell silent. The sun touched the horizon. And Nathaniel Thorne, the architect, the founder, the legend who had finally learned what mattered most, sat with his family at the memorial wall and let himself be present. For whatever time he had left, for however long that turned out to be, he was finally completely, irrevocably home.